Okay, so this is my data analysis project on the correlation of variable factors on movie revenue in terms of US box office. So it's not in terms of what companies are paid by streaming services. It's not like DVD purchases. Yeah. So now, as a disclaimer, there are some restrictions of the data set. It's a little old. The sample size at most is 75, assuming that the variables concerned are not missing data. And so, yeah, keep that in mind. And for the first factor analysis, I did movie star gender to see if there was, to compare, let's see if there's a correlation between the total revenue and the gender of the movie star. And um, from the data here, there isn't that much. I would argue there's nothing alarming really. The means are not that far apart. They're not that different. The first quartiles are very similar, and so the second you see with the plot of the male data that that the third and fourth quartiles are significantly greater than the female. However, it should be mentioned that we have a huge sample size difference, and now that's a whole other argument. And in terms of disparity, right? In the ratio between movies that have female stars to movies that have male stars. And that's indicated by the fact that we have a sample size of 66 for the males uh, and a sample size of 9 for movies featuring female movie stars. Um, I'm sure that although there is a huge difference between the maximums of these two categories, I would argue that there that would probably not be the case if we had more examples, more samples for the female. So yeah. For my first scatter plot analysis, I did. I wanted to see if there was if the performance in the opening weekend set the trajectory for a movie long run for total revenue, right? Um, I did find it interesting that of all movies, Harry Potter, the second one, I guess, I haven't seen any of them, made more than a quarter of its total revenue in its opening weekend. Um, so yeah, and then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Avatar um, that barely made any revenue in its opening weekend compared to its total revenue. So that's interesting. The correlation value isn't very strong. Mathematically speaking, it says that the two variables are positively correlated, but not by a lot. The linear regression model has a relatively large p-value, so that doesn't tell us that these variables are not correlated, but it doesn't say that they are by any means. And the slope is arguably high. Uh, I I would like to think that there is a that these two things are directly related. That the performance in the opening weekend sets a trajectory for the total revenue, but the fact of the matter is that we cannot um, confuse correlation with causation, and so here there's nothing statistically robust. For the second factor analysis, I compared the studio production and the total revenue, and what was interesting is that my hypothesis that movies produced by the Walt Disney Studio um, would have better performance was actually completely false. Um, And so, as you see here, in basically every metric, um, the yeah, Walt Disney is slacking compared to Warner Brothers and other. Um, and so that's why I listed the some of the movies representing Walt Disney in this data set, to say, just to prove that, or to provide that they're not just some run of the mill movies. They're like iconic movies, like The Lion King, Up, The Incredibles, Toy Story 2, and Cars. Like these are iconic movies. So it's just interesting. Um, but it should be mentioned that Walt Disney, they have Disneyland and other things, and so I'm sure they make up a lot of revenue there. And so yeah. Um, and then for my second scatterplot analysis, I compared the trailer length with the total revenue, because you know the natural thought is that the better the trailer, um, the more hype generated for a movie, and the more people are going to be interested, motivated to go to the movies and watch it and pay that money for the U.S. box office recorded in this data set. And so, um, I want to mention that, assuming that this data is in trailer length of seconds, it may be scaled. It might be, each value is actually 2 seconds. But regardless of that, see that little point on the far right side with the longest trailer length? Assuming it's seconds, that's 425 seconds. Um, that's a long trailer. That's Forrest Gump, and I found that interesting. Um, it's one of my favorite movies personally. And yeah, so the linear regression model. Well, okay, first, the correlation is very low. They're positively correlated mathematically, but it's a very small value, and the p-value is very large. So that points to no correlation, and the slope is very small. So, um, sad to say, but this the statistical analysis of the trailer length versus the revenue shows no correlation, or little correlation. So, yeah. In terms of concluding thoughts, for funsies, I compared other variables that compared to other things that weren't total revenue, and I found it interesting, um, and comparing the budget, or the opening weekend performance, as a function of the budget, and that was actually like the only case where you could see there's actually a significant correlation between the two, but as they're positively correlated by almost zero point 0.5, and then the slope is zero point 0.3, and the p-value is relatively small. Um, but yeah, overall, should not confuse correlation with causation. And there's also something to say about the data set. A data analysis is only as good as its data set, and so having a gestalt representative data set is always going to warrant better analyses and conclusions from that. And so, as we increase our sample size, this data set had 75 samples, but if we had 1,000, we'd have a lot more to work with, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you for watching, and